Let's be honest, most of us just skip the foreword to get right to chapter 1, right? But what if the foreword is the key that unlocks the entire book? Well, today we're diving into Norman Doidge's introduction to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and you're about to see how it lays a foundation that's every bit as powerful as the rules themselves. Right off the bat, Doidge hits on a question that I think we've all felt. In a world that already feels so complicated, do we really need more rules? I mean, it's that natural gut reaction we have against being told what to do, especially when the advice feels totally disconnected from our own, messy, real lives. Doidge nails this feeling with a great joke about Moses. You can see the punchline right here. And it's funny because it's so true. We cheer when we get fewer rules, but at the same time, there's this little voice in the back of our heads that knows that without any rules, we'd probably be a total mess. We'd be slaves to our own worst impulses. And that's the tension, isn't it? We want freedom, but we desperately need structure. Okay, so if we have this love-hate relationship with rules, why are millions of people all of a sudden searching for them? Well, Doidge argues it's because this internal conflict is now playing out on a massive societal scale. It's created what he calls a generation without guidance, a whole generation feeling pretty adrift in a very confusing moral world. Doidge paints this picture of a generation basically caught in a huge cultural tug-of-war. So on one side, you have this voice saying, hey, it's all relative, there's no such thing as absolute truth, and the absolute worst thing you can possibly be is judgmental. But then on the other side, you've got these super rigid black and white ideologies yelling that they have the one and only truth. So you're stuck, right? Your choices are either nothing matters, or you blindly follow one simple, all-encompassing answer. It's a perfect recipe for feeling completely and utterly lost. And what's the result of all this cultural whiplash? Doidge calls it a kind of profound neglect. He argues that we've basically taken thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom on how to live a good, meaningful life and just tossed it out the window. All those tools, all those insights our ancestors fought and died for, they've been dismissed, leaving a whole generation to basically figure it all out from scratch. So who's the guy offering these rules anyway? Doidge doesn't just give us a CV or a list of accomplishments. Nope. Instead, he tells us a story. It's about his very first meeting with the man he calls the cowboy psychologist. Just picture this for a second. You're at a dinner party, you're making small talk about the weather or sports, and this new guy, who's wearing cowboy boots, by the way, casually pivots from talking about the appetizers to the fundamental nature of evil. That's the image Doidge gives us. He describes Peterson as someone whose mind is just overflowing with ideas, someone who treats life's biggest, scariest questions not as some dry academic topic, but as the most urgent, practical things we could ever talk about. And this intensity, it's driven home by this one really powerful detail. Doidge talks about visiting Peterson's house and seeing it was filled with Soviet propaganda posters. He makes it clear it wasn't there because he admired it. It was there as a constant, in-your-face reminder of the absolute catastrophe that comes from utopian ideas, a reminder of the 100 million people who were murdered in the pursuit of a perfect world. So what does this all add up to? Doidge gives us a portrait of someone who is first and foremost practical. He only cares about an idea if it can actually help someone. He's also someone who thinks out loud, who welcomes being challenged because he sees thinking as a dialogue, a path to the truth. And yeah, he's deeply, deeply tormented by history's greatest tragedies, not just as a scholar, but as someone who is desperately trying to understand the roots of evil so we can maybe, just maybe, avoid repeating them. And this whole portrait of the man, it flows directly into the philosophy behind the rules themselves. So let's dig into the core ideas that Doidge lays out, which are built on a framework that Peterson says is basically as old as humanity. Okay, this right here is the central concept. Our lives are a constant back and forth between two fundamental realities. First, there's chaos. That's the unexpected, the unknown, everything that can and does go wrong. Then there's order. That's the predictable, the stable, the meaningful territory we create. Doidge explains that for Peterson, our oldest myths and stories aren't just fairy tales. They are incredibly sophisticated maps for how to live right on that razor's edge between the two. And that, of course, brings us to this book. Doidge presents 12 Rules for Life as the practical, user-friendly guide to all those dense academic ideas that Peterson first explored in his book Maps of Meaning. So if that first book was the complex theory, this one is the how-to manual. It's for creating meaningful order out of the chaos of your own life. And this gets us to the great danger that Peterson is constantly warning us about: ideology. Doidge defines these as simple, rigid ideas that pretend they have the answer to everything. They give you the comfort of certainty, sure, but as the 20th century showed us in the most brutal way possible, they often lead to absolute catastrophe, because reality is just way too complicated for simple answers. And this brings us right back around to the beginning. If rigid ideologies are a trap and that anything goes moral relativism just leaves us feeling empty and lost, then what's the alternative? Doidge argues that this vacuum, this empty space, is the source of a deep, often unspoken hunger for real, meaningful structure. The proof for this hunger? Doidge suggests it's just staggering. The fact that Peterson's old university lectures have been watched hundreds of millions of times online, that isn't just about him being a compelling speaker. It's a huge signal of a massive, unmet demand for genuine guidance in a world that often refuses to give any. Which leads to the final, really critical question Doidge tackles. Look, if the word rules makes everyone so uncomfortable, why not just soften it up a bit? Why not call them guidelines or suggestions? Why use such a tough, uncompromising word? Doidge's answer here is blunt. They're called rules because when you're trying to build a solid foundation for your life, some things are just not optional. The central message, he says, is a powerful demand for radical personal responsibility. Period. Before you go out and try to fix the world, you have a fundamental duty to get your own house in perfect order first. And he closes with this final, really provocative thought. For all our talk about not wanting to be judged, maybe what we actually crave, deep down in our psyche, is to be judged. Not by other people, but to be held up against the highest standard we can set for ourselves. It leaves us with a powerful question to chew on. What if the very structure we're always pushing against is the one thing we need to actually be free?